The opinions you hear on Your Mountain from individual hosts or guests do not necessarily represent those of Your Mountain, our sponsors, or other entities we're affiliated with professionally or otherwise.
There are millions of acres of opportunity out there. They belong to you. Every day, decisions are being made that affect your land, your water, your wildlife. You should know about them. This is Your Mountain. Hey, everybody. Welcome back for another episode of the Your Mountain Podcast. As always, I'm your host, David Wilms, and I'm joined tonight again by the one and the only Nephi Cole.
And when you say again, is it because you left the podcast to go do something you thought was more important than came back? Or is there some other reason you said again?
No, I'm just saying you're always here. Yeah. Oh, wait, no, that's Mike. Mike's still here.
No,
hey, Mike.
Mike's still here. Mike and I enjoyed some quiet time while you decided to go wander around your house, and I don't know what you were doing, but here we are waiting to do a podcast. You're wandering around your house someplace.
Trying to get the internet to work, but it's working now. So before we get this kicked off,
I could make a lot of jokes about the internet and who it works for and who it doesn't, but I'm going to leave them.
That's probably for the best. So we've got a great guest joining us tonight. Before I introduce him, there are two things that I wanted to throw out there for you guys. One is, for all the listeners out there, we're upping our game here at Your Mountain. And by upping our game, I mean we're starting to put out, hopefully, we've done it once now, we're hoping to do it on a more regular basis, some really high quality video content through our YouTube channel. We'll post them all on social, but check it out. Nephi, hey, you just did this most recent video. Do you want to talk about it for just a second?
No, I don't.
Nephi? All right.
No, we do it like, it's not me. It's like, this is a group effort. So we just,
I was watching you texting, by the way, I was watching you texting while I was saying that, which is why I called you out right there.
Yeah, I was telling my wife to turn the AC off in the house.
Right now. He's just in his own zone.
So they didn't just blow up. But no, it's pretty cool. We're going to try and get some more information out there, educational materials, and it's just for people's entertainment and, thought process. But I think it'll be good, and I think we're going to do a bunch more of them that are going to be hopefully cool.
Are you going to mention what this one was?
Go check it out.
Yep, it's about the ATF Form 1 process. And so if you're super into the ATF Form 1 process, you should probably check it out because there's nothing quite as exciting
Can you
as
really
compliance.
Quickly what is ATF Form 1?
Say what that is. Yeah, come on.
Like dragging this out of you.
So the ATF Form 1 process, it's for people if you wanted to manufacture your own suppressor. So there's a lot of people. Suppressors are awesome, so we'll just say that. And we're going to talk a lot more about hunting with suppressors, why everybody should hunt with suppressors. But there's a lag time it's called the Form 4 process to purchase a suppressor. So if you make a suppressor, it actually takes about 30 days to go through the paperwork to be able to fabricate your own, rather than having to wait for the ATF to process the paperwork through Form 4. And the other thing that's kind of cool about that is there's just lots that's cool about that. So check it out. It's pretty nice.
So check it out. It'll be on our YouTube channel, but we're sharing all of this on social media as well. So as you all know, go over to our handles at It's Your Mountain on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and you'll be able to find the link to the YouTube channel and that video there. Here's the other thing I wanted to mention before we really dive into tonight's topic. You guys always just give me nothing but crap over my cheapness and my lack of gear and
you deserve it. You know it.
All that stuff, right?
Nothing ashamed of.
It's like endless. Well, I just wanted to go on, and we're going to get into a little more of that in this podcast probably. I'm not ashamed of it.
Oh,
I'm not ashamed of it in the slightest. But no, here's my big announcement.
Okay.
I just bought new gear. I bought new gear.
What'd you get?
I love backpacking in the summer. I got a new 2-man backpacking tent, a really top of the line, high quality, ultra backpacking tent. Comes in at just under 2 pounds. It is awesome.
That's a light 2-man tent.
It wasn't given to me.
Did you use points?
It's awesome.
What brand was it?
So you used points.
What tent did you get?
I used but it's still new gear. I got a Big Agnes tent.
Which Big Agnes?
Big Agnes
is
a
tent. I like
small company in Steamboat Springs.
Yeah, they're a great company.
Do you really? Yeah, it's awesome. I don't have the model number memorized. I'm sorry.
Mine's called the Ultra Flyer.
It's an awesome tent. It's a the UL, the ultralight.
Yeah, and it's
ULF, ultralight fly.
And mine comes
that's what I've got.
Mine comes in about 2.5 pounds trail weight, and it's they're light. They're nice. I use mine whenever we do, whenever I elk hunt when I have to pack it. It's a great tent for one guy.
I just replaced my old tent, which was about 6 pounds, that I've had forever, with this thing. And I just thought I thought you'd appreciate the fact that I just got new gear, but then Mike pointed out I used points, and he's going to say, it might be new gear, but you didn't really pay for it. But I paid for a lot of other things to accumulate the points.
No shame in that game.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I think it's awesome. I don't have points to use, so
you should go get a new tent, awesome. Mike. What's wrong with you?
I still have a tent that I purchased in 1999 from Walmart, it works.
Does that weigh 11 pounds?
Yeah, Dave, let's make fun of him now.
Okay.
Dave,
Mike,
you make fun of him. Mike,
all right. Here's the deal. So, Mike, I backpack with a guy you guys know I backpack do these big epic treks every late July, early August with a bunch of guys. And 2 years ago, one of the guys I went with brought up a tent that he just bought from Walmart on this backpacking trip, and it didn't have a rain fly.
Oh no.
And we got absolutely just dumped on. And all of his
sleeping
gear.
In his tent? No,
No, I had my own tent. No, he was by himself, but everything he owned was just soaking wet. And we were, 12 miles from the truck and on day 2 of a 7-day trip. And he just had to, man up and get through it. The next year he came up with a ultralight, super nice tent with a good rain fly. So those Walmart tents have their place, but those they call them rain flies, and I have
I didn't think you could. Yeah, I didn't think you could buy one.
And the little kids in it.
I usually use the living room for the children.
Yes. It works very well there.
I didn't think they would sell a tent at Walmart that didn't have a rain fly. I mean, it just seemed like a part and parcel.
Are you serious?
It did not. I assumed that none of them came with a rain fly because it's Walmart. I assumed most of the tents were made of garbage bags.
Yeah.
And that was your rain protection.
Which would have worked better.
Which would have worked a lot better. Anyway, I digress a little bit. I just wanted to bring that up because you guys give me so much crap every single week about my cheap gear or lack of gear, and I just wanted to point out that I upped my gear game for this backpacking. But I'm going to tell you why really quick, and then we'll move on. It's because I'm starting to feel like I'm getting a little old and achy, and I needed to reduce my tent weight so that I could make up for it by buying a backpacking cot to get myself off the ground just a little bit so my hips wouldn't hurt.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's the best thing you did right there.
You're preaching to the choir. I mean, is it going to surprise you to know that I have 4 different tents and several different versions of backpack cots? No.
I love it.
This is what you do.
I love having a podcast with a bunch of late 20-year-old guys here. Us old guys here that still want to get after it, but want a little bit of extra comfort. I now have my mandatory must pack list on my backpack includes a camp chair.
Yeah.
I have to have a chair on my backpacking trips. I'll pack that, 18 ounces, or actually it's more like 30 ounces. I don't care. I'm a stout guy. I can pack a little extra weight for the creature comforts of camp.
I'll tell you what. That's how you know we did some things wrong, because number one, and that we're old. have bunches of friends now, like we're like all these military guys. They're all retired. They're all our age, but they're all retired. They're done. They're just like they're doing other stuff. They're acting like it's a job. They just do whatever they want to do for fun, and then they charge people for it, and they call it work.
Speaking of military guys that are much younger than us, see what I'm doing here. I think it's probably time that we introduce our guest tonight. Right?
He has waited through a lot of...
Yeah, he's been sitting here through an awful lot of nonsense, and we're chewing up his time. So I don't remember how long ago it was. It was probably a month ago or so. I joined Ben Paige on his podcast, the Fowl Front Waterfowl Podcast. And as we started talking about doing a podcast about migratory birds and waterfowl and the regulatory scheme around that, it seemed like, this is a great opportunity to bring Ben, who is he's a waterfowl expert. So, we wanted to bring him on, so we set the stage. If you didn't listen already, listen to our last episode where we kind of set the stage for this discussion by talking about the regulatory statutory framework of why we have waterfowl seasons the way we have them. And we wanted to bring on Ben to talk more nuts and bolts and, get away from some of our boring deep dive stuff and talk some good stories and tactics and strategies and some issues that he's been thinking about, related to waterfowl hunting and the state regulations and federal regulations around those. So Ben, first of all, thanks for joining us. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah. Pretty generous there with the expert title, I'd say.
Well, no, I'm just putting a lot of pressure on you now, to back it up here.
Anybody that does it better than Dave, he just calls an expert so he can consider himself like, he likes to be on par with that. So he's like, yeah,
sure.
Here's another expert. He has pheasant hunted 4 times this year, just like me. We're experts. We're very expert at pheasant hunting.
No, so I know Ben is an expert because I remember sitting around in a speakeasy or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sure. In Omaha, right as the world was shutting down back in March, and hearing some of the stories you were telling about, waterfowl hunting, some of the things you like to do. And I thought, man, this is a guy that knows his stuff, way more than I do. Cause I know we got to talking about it cause, Nephi talks about wanting to goose hunt all the time. And so we got into,
I like to bring up the injustice of you, never, sharing. That's it. Just the fact that you have this, goose pit that you like to sit in by yourself and have naps. Like, that's it. Like, I don't care. Like, you don't need to bring me with you. You can just go nap by yourself in your goose pit. Just enjoy yourself.
Hey, we go through that every week. We're not going to rehash old ground here. Ben.
Yes.
Do you have a goose pit?
Tell us.
And if you do, can I come?
No, we'll get to that. He's always going to ask to join anybody. He wants to hunt with anybody, but tell us about yourself. Which is different than
Dave, who would never want to hunt with anybody. Dave would never try and glom on.
I just have more tact. More tact.
The first night I met you guys, I heard about this goose pit situation, and I remember. It was
Dave was holding it over my head. I'm sure.
Yeah.
Just he.
He leaned over quietly to me and he said, "Hey, you can come join me in the goose pit this fall. Just don't invite Nephi." And I was thinking, this is the first night I met this guy. He must be a pretty good guy. And I didn't know what that said about your character, Nephi. So
yeah, well, it tells you a lot about Dave.
Good.
And the vendettas that I hold for no apparent reason. Anyway, Ben, tell us about yourself. Give us a little background.
Okay. So I started off deer hunting back when I was in high school. I got introduced to it. I guess before that I was upland hunter with my dad. My dad liked to train dogs and go out upland hunting. And then I got out of college and I went into the Army, and I was in the farthest point west Texas in El Paso, and there wasn't much deer hunting around. It was pay to play, or you could go north to New Mexico and get your draw. And I turns out there's ducks out in West Texas and out in the desert. And I got on them, and it's kind of been history since then. I kind of taught myself how to waterfowl hunt with the aid of a couple buddies from a distance and a lot of online research. And I just recently got out of the Army, and now I work helping state agencies. We provide technological infrastructure and tools to sell and manage hunting licenses, and I kind of work with the marketing arm of that. So,
are you allowed to say what company that is? I know you are, because we had I don't know, is he technically your boss or somebody, a coworker? We've had him on before. Eric.
He's
Danger.
Definitely my first line supervisor and the guy that hired me. He's my boss. I call him my boss. So, yeah. So I work with Sovereign Sportsmen Solutions, and
You work for Eric Dinger. That's got to be hard.
Yeah. No, Eric's a good boss.
I don't know.
Working with Eric.
I think you're being pretty generous there, and it's because he's your boss that you're saying that. I mean, I get it. I get it. I have to be nice to Dave.
We're muting
on a podcast together.
Right. We're muting it. Right. We're pushing pause right now. You can tell us what you really think.
Yeah.
And then we'll go back to live again.
Nobody listens to this except
I'm actually taking a break from work right now, and it's 10:45 Central right now. So
PM, not AM.
PM, everybody. We're
correct.
Just to be clear.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your podcast. You said you got into waterfowl hunting when you were in the Army, and you're stationed in Texas, out in El Paso. But at some point, you became self-taught, and it became a passion. You say the rest is history, but in the midst of it, you started a very successful podcast about waterfowl hunting.
Well, I learned a lot of really strange, untraditional lessons and techniques through the internet and trial and error, and just kind of trying to do it self-taught. And I thought if there was any way that I could help alleviate those barriers to entrance, motivate somebody to get out there and maybe help them navigate their first, 2 or 3 seasons, it was a resource that I would have appreciated. In fact, I had, a resource like that too in another podcast that I listened to, but it wasn't specifically giving me what I wanted. So I just went out there, and I realized that there's probably a lot of people like me out there that like to do it yourself. And, I wanted to be able to provide that for them. And additionally, I always kind of knew that I was a little bit unfulfilled in the off season, and I released the first episode 2 weeks before my daughter was born, and that I don't know, kind of just I really wanted to go out there, and I had a goal that I wanted to do something in the outdoors world, and I kind of felt like I was pressed to achieve my dreams before my daughter got here, and to kind of do it for her. And this is a kind of a sad, touchy story too. I always kind of thought, I was like, well, what if something ever happened to me where I couldn't teach my daughter how to waterfowl hunt? And it was like, well, she could always have, hundreds of hours of me talking about waterfowl hunting to maybe reflect on if I wasn't there for some reason or another. So
that's super cool. That's a really neat story. That's awesome. And it's interesting how many people, I think, the passion that you have for it and that you want to share that. It's interesting how many people get into, telling stories about the outdoors and talking about it because they have a passion in the next generation of people, whether it be family or not, and trying to share that experience that they had. That's cool.
Yeah. And I'd say podcasting is my second favorite art form that manifests in. I really like that a lot of waterfowl hunters get into photography. There's, I feel like every day I'm seeing some other acquaintance that I have on the internet, or some friend that I have on the internet that's a waterfowl hunter, is like, got my first camera, and they're posting really great pictures. I like that a lot. And
then the next step, they go from photography to actual oil painting. I know a number. I don't know what it is about waterfowl, but it seems to be one of the most painted wildlife, types of species right out there. A lot of wild waterfowl hunters actually get into art,
Really, it's the colors probably. And I know Adam Allers from K-State, he teaches a waterfowl watercolor painting class to help people identify waterfowl species by painting the characteristic features.
I was going to make a joke and say, is it because waterfowl hunting is boring? But no, that's not the issue. So you wouldn't know, Nephi. You never get invites to go. The reality is, see, the funny thing is we joke about waterfowl, like goose hunting to me and duck hunting are very different beasts. At least goose hunting with Dave, because goose hunting with Dave is like basically going to the Holiday Inn and then having like a hot chocolate and a nap. But so tell me about wait
a minute. That's not my experience goose hunting with Dave.
I'm trying to embellish this.
Yeah, I know. Like, well, maybe you're doing it wrong, Nephi.
I'm just trying. I'm trying to make.
Wait. Nephi, let Mike explain his experience.
Thanksgiving Day, and we limited it out in 30 minutes. It was awesome. It was bam, 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 bam. It was great.
There's no hot chocolate there. How great is that?
We didn't have time to make hot chocolate. 2 birds with 1 shot kind of day.
Yeah, it was unreal. Yeah. And Nephi, I have taken you before, and I've mentioned this many times, and we had a pretty successful day when you and I went.
But it wouldn't be entertaining if we just talked about what a great day we had sitting in the goose pit.
You keep trash talking about this,
Dave, I'm doing
sipping your hot chocolate and being all bored in a Holiday Inn.
It's for your podcast.
Anyway,
this is all for you.
We're not here to beat each other up. We're here to learn.
I do this
Ben,
because I care about you.
You just keep sucking away from the.
Well, I had a question actually.
Look, we've devolved to now Ben's asking the question. He's got to get us all back on track.
It's your podcast now, Ben. Take it over.
Oh no. No, Nephi, you were talking earlier about suppressors and why everybody should use one to hunt. And I know there's a lot of benefits to that. Yeah. However, I can't imagine, adding another, was it 12 inches for most shotgun, suppressors?
They're pretty innovative when you see them on there, but I kind of think the same thing. But it's tough to explain. Like, I guess I have so many questions because to be truthful, everybody on this podcast, we're primarily big game hunters in Wyoming. We'll hunt other stuff, especially Dave, whether it's pigeons or, little something in his backyard, he'll kill that. But, in general, we're just going to, primarily we're kind of, big guns, side of a mountain, a few shots. And we'll hunt some, upland, a little bit of upland game and things like that. But you find waterfowl hunters, man, you guys are passionate about it, and it's so different, especially duck hunting. I say, to me, like, that's just the world of that is so different to me than what I'm used to, that I'm super interested in it. And I can see how somebody'd get absolutely wrapped around the axle in love with it because, I've got a dog that I love but just there's so much to it. It's
a very nuanced sport, just in the same way that I think archery elk hunting is very nuanced to the people that take archery very seriously and practice it in their daily lives, and they get very into the weeds. There's a lot of diversity and different ways that you can hunt waterfowl, and wet, dry, primarily ducks, primarily geese, crossover of both, rivers, big water, swamps. There's just so many different techniques and methods and situations and scenarios that you can find yourself in, or find yourself preferring, that I think it's a really great hunting opportunity in that respect. I also think that the best part about waterfowl hunting, is the social aspect. So
you just basically being in a blind or in a boat with your buddies and being able to interact.
I just always feel like it's a low pressure situation. The only time I ever feel like pressure or anything is if I'm taking a first time hunter out there. Then I'm worrying about how cold it is. Then I'm worrying about if the birds are going to come in, etc. But otherwise, I'm really just focused on, you put the good scout in and you find the birds, or you don't, and then you still go hunting, and it doesn't, you get to have a good time, especially if it's somebody that shares the same thought processes, ideologies, and philosophy behind, hey, we're out here to enjoy the sunrise and shoot some ducks or some geese and, make a time out of it outdoors, which is, I think, the most important part.
Do you feel like waterfowlers, so 2 questions, do they specialize? And number 2, in the big game world, we have cliques in the big game world, of course. There's like the trad bow hunter, and then there's this guy and that guy. We always talk about the need to break down those cliques and how we call, we've used the term before, hyphenated hunting, and how bad that is for us as a community. But within the waterfowl community, what are, if you were to generalize the specializations, and is there specializing? Is there clickiness? What is it?
I would say the biggest determining factor in segregating waterfowl hunters or segmenting waterfowl hunters would be whether or not they've got a field spread. Probably close second to that, or maybe even before that. So
explain that to people who don't know, like who never get invited to the goose pit with Dave. Sure.
Well, to hunt a field, a dry field, ag field or something like that, it takes, generally a decent little amount of decoys. I'm not saying you can't get away with a half a dozen in certain situations, but by and large, the thing you're usually seeing is a trailer full of full body decoys.
Dave has like 100. Is that too many?
I am actually no. Oh, but go ahead, Ben.
Say it depends. It's situation dependent. If you would ask my wife how many decoys I have, and I have full confidence that she's not going to listen to this podcast, so I'm okay with that. She would probably only be able to name like a quarter of the decoys that I have access to. Mm-hmm. So that's what I mean by
that she's ever seen.
Yeah, well, I hunt with a lot of silhouettes, so those are easily hidden.
I'm going to give Mike and Nephi a little cheapness ammo here on me after I led this podcast by saying I'm not cheap. So I do hunt now with probably, I don't know how many dozen, probably about 8 dozen or so decoys. That's what I've got now.
That's really close to 100.
And I'd say that. And I say not me personally. I mean, it's the collective group, right, that hunts in this pit. That's what we've got. But one of my contributions early on was I took a class and I learned how to paper mache. And I actually took decoys and I paper mached decoys to double my spread. I had several dozen paper mached decoys, and they actually stood up to the Wyoming weather pretty well because we didn't get rain, goose hunting in December. It stood up to the snow pretty well. You had to get them dried out, but after a number of years, they probably lasted.
They're gone now.
8-9 years. Oh, they're gone now. They lasted about 8-9 years, and then they just kind of disintegrated from the weather. But I was so cheap that I was reusing my newspapers to make goose decoys.
But they lasted 8 or 9 years. I mean, yes. I assume you had to like touch up, paint them or something.
I did every off season. I'd touch up, paint them, and I'd actually coat them with like a waterproof sealant. Which, wasn't
thousands
super effective.
Of dollars worth of sealant and time.
Well, you just think about it all the time, but when you really think about it, that's one of, and the reason I bring this up is actually to swing this back to Ben. That seems to be one of the barriers to entry for some people because decoys are some of the most expensive hunting gear you can buy. I mean, especially if you feel like you need to have a big spread. For full body goose decoys, you could be spending a couple $100 on half a dozen. And so how do you talk to people that are trying to get into waterfowl hunting, recognizing that there's that really expensive barrier to entry?
Does that come back to what you said?
If they feel like they need to have decoys. Do you have approaches where they can get involved where decoys just aren't necessary?
Does that come back to what you said? Like that, there's guys that have a field spread and guys that don't. And
yeah, by and large, waterfowl hunting is a gear intensive sport. And I think about it. In fact, I think that the number one biggest barrier to entry besides, the shotgun for people is the waders, because waders can cost you anywhere from $85 to $400 or $1,000 if you want to spring for the high end stuff. And so just those two things alone right there, you could be looking at anywhere from on the low end, $600, $500 to, you know, the possibilities are limitless there. But then, yeah, you add in things like your decoys, and I've never been, and I never will be probably, a guy that's hung up on super realistic, expensive decoys. I'm the guy that will stop by a garage sale and see that there's a trash bag full of decoys in there, and I just take some spray paint or some bed liner and turn them into coot decoys. Those are really effective. And as far as my field spread, same thing there as well. I went with silhouettes because they're cheaper and you can get a lot more, and you don't have to buy a trailer. You can pack them in the back of your truck. But as far as Dave, you were talking about someone trying to get into hunting without decoys. I think I think you can go buy some hot buys, which, maybe $30 for a dozen, or I could be off in those prices, but I've had the same decoys for probably 6 seasons now.
As far
as floaters.
That's funny. I've been hunting with the same decoys since I was 11.
Well, you got to remember, I came to waterfowl hunting, as a late onset hunter. So
sure. Yeah. Which is, you're in good company, because as our listeners know, Mike was, I know Mike did some squirrel hunting and such as a kid, but for the most part, the big stuff, he's an adult onset hunter.
Definitely. Adult onset. Yeah. Late adult onset too.
My wife,
I feel like that puts us in a certain camp where we kind of look at those privileged enough to have been in the particular pursuit of that game for a long time, or their dads taught them. Kind of look at them and look at those spoiled guys. It's kind of like the rich dads, poor dads argument of hunting.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
learning opportunities.
I've also found that there are some that've been hunting their whole lives and they don't know all that much. So
yeah, they just kind of follow dad. But we got to change that adult onset hunting term. It sounds like a disease. We got to figure something. We got to figure out a new thing to call that. It's not the right term.
If anybody have any ideas, let us know. We'll use it. I like it. We should come up with something else.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that there's no good viruses, because that's what hunting is.
Oh, hunting's awesome.
It is. That's a good virus.
Yeah,
hunting is a great
figure out how
virus.
to roll that in. My wife is so happy that I don't live someplace where there's better waterfowl hunting, because we live close. I mean, honestly, we live close to some really neat places, but if I lived, in a little bit better place, man, my house would just be, because I'm a gear junkie already. David and Mike know that. There would be some seriously cool stuff around this house.
That's, you know what, hunting. Nephi,
I should waterfowl hunt.
I've been holding back. I haven't told you the real reason that I haven't let you come up goose hunting on a regular basis. I'm afraid that you then want to be a member in the pit, and that I'd let you do it and your wife would leave you. I'm protecting you from yourself.
Yeah. Well,
to save your marriage.
Well, that sounds totally fake, but hey, go with it.
Hey, go ahead, Nephi.
No, I mean, just so you know, Ben, I have offered many times. I have offered to buy my way into this club of Dave's before anybody's out of it, because Dave is a very shrewd guy. Those hunter decoys. Dave made sure that everybody in his pit is about 90 years old, so that number one, they never go goose hunting, and number two, they're all going to die and leave the decoys. And so, I see the writing on the wall, so I've tried to slide a check under to Dave, like, hey man, when one of those seats opens up, where I am.
He's not kidding. He was literally willing to pay the lease share every year until a spot opened up to be guaranteed to have a spot.
I was, but also
have you ever heard of something like that, Ben?
Yeah. No, I don't think I have.
You got to remember this, the other guys who leased this pit, they've leased it since like the 1940s. And so it's still at that rate. So it's not like this is a real expensive lease to get into. It's like,
what's the appeal to the pit? Is there birds always on it?
Yes. Like this spot, like it's like the only spot in Wyoming where geese land, but they all land there.
They're like all winter long. There's about 40,000 birds that sit on a couple of lakes within about a mile of this pit.
If DIA,
so they all come off the water to feed, and this is all farmland, and that's where they go.
It is to geese.
Just insane.
It is to geese what DIA is to airliners in Colorado. It's like everybody's stopping there sooner or later, and so all you do, and that's actually, I will tell you, like that was I haven't hunted much waterfowl, but I had a blast going up with Dave because to me it's something I never, I just enjoy it. Like with geese especially, it's just kind of neat to me. Like they're so big, and I just, the picture in my head is like just calling them and having them come in, like literally look like airliners just coming in. And then when you throw the top off the pit and they all start to panic, I love it. It's super fun.
There's not a lot that rivals just that second before you pop up and the first sight picture.
Hey, let me ask you, I want to talk more about this fun stuff, but I want to talk, we're kind of a bunch of nerds on this podcast, right?
Sure.
I think maybe that's one of the things that people like about what we do is we really nerd out.
True.
I want to ask you some nerdy questions here.
Okay.
So let's talk. So in our last episode, we talked a lot about the regulatory framework, like the Migratory Bird Treaty Act and the Duck Stamp Act, and how those work in how the Migratory Bird Treaty Act works for purposes of setting seasons and that kind of thing. And I know you have some thoughts on. Well, let me back up before we get to that. I know, as we talked about before, the Fish and Wildlife Service and the states work together to set seasons. And I'm curious, as you've gotten involved more heavily in waterfowl hunting, have you found yourself getting involved as a member of the public with states or the federal government in any way as they're going through that process? And if so, what have you done? What are the opportunities there for the public to be engaged?
Sure. There's a multitude of ways that the states reach out to different waterfowl hunters, either through wing harvest collections or hunter surveys, et cetera. But they also do public open forums where you can come voice your input that they listen to, and they compare to their research and harvest data, hunter use data, other feedback. And they for instance, I think it was not last season, but the season before that in Kansas, they went around to 6 different spots and they conducted a presentation and then a Q&A at the end to get people's feedbacks and discussion and explain things. And I thought it was a pretty cool process to be a part of. I attended, as a regular part of the population, and I just kind of sat in the back and took notes. I didn't feel like I had a lot of teeth in the argument because I knew I was going to be moving from Kansas at that point, and I hadn't been around that long either. So I was just sitting back and hearing everybody's explanations for this or that, and I just thought it was a very interesting process.
And so I know I've seen it in the past, having represented a state wildlife agency. I've actually seen how that public input can manifest itself in how bag limits are set or how seasons are set within the federal framework that's provided under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Have you noticed that as well? Like the public input really matters.
So, right. So, I mean, as everybody knows from listening to your last episode, that essentially the states get a budget and then they get a framework with how they can spend the budget of waterfowl hunting days, right? So you can have 3 zones with no split. So you can have 3 different waterfowl hunting seasons within your state geographical boundaries, but you can't have a split. It's got to be consecutive days. Or you can have a split season but you can't have more than 3 segments, and you can't break it up by zones, or you can have 2 zones with the option of a split zones for either one zone or for both of them. And so they break that down. So they look at kind of like, okay, we've got X amount of days based on our flyway from our flyway committee, and the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. And then they take the ways that they can spend those, and they try to maximize it so they can share the equity of hunting throughout the state. For instance, in Kansas, in the southeast portion of Kansas, it's primarily like rivers and agricultural fields, and there's actually a geographical difference because they've got they're not the Flint Hills, they're a little bit different geographical area and so they're hunting rivers and stuff like that, where maybe people up north are hunting different watersheds and fields. And so you have to accommodate different geographical areas, as well as north and south, latitudes. But then there's also people that just prefer to hunt in fields, and people prefer to hunt in water. And those optimal times happen during different times of the season. And so hearing people's opinions about that in different areas helps them carve out those splits in those zones, which is,
My experience is you also have landowners that want people out there at certain times of year, but maybe not others for various reasons. And sometimes that factors into the season setting too.
Okay. Would you mind expanding on that? I haven't really heard an argument for that yet.
I haven't heard an argument that I agree with.
What's the argument you don't?
So there's an interesting thing. There are, for goose seasons in our state, there are parts of the state where the limit is 5, for example. And then there are parts of the state where the limit is 4. And it's in the same flyway. It might be in the same region, but you have a carve out within the region and the limit is different. And when you go to the regional, to the local season setting meetings, and listen to the landowners, there are landowners that don't want a limit of 5. They want to see a limit of 4. And they have concerns, and I can't explain what the concerns are. I don't know that I necessarily agree with them biologically, but there are enough of them that are on the same page. And it's in an area that's highly desired for waterfowl hunting, that landowners can threaten to say, we're just not going to lease our land and nobody's going to get to shoot any birds this year. And so there are opportunities to have some influence that way on things like,
I suppose limits. That's kind of the same as like bucket biology in that,
Sure.
When I went to these meetings, I honestly to tell you, people are passionate about their passions, and, right or wrong, whether or not the science backs them up or not, they have opinions that they believe are, informed, and they might be informed. And the whole time I felt kind of bad for the policy setters, the biologist who's up there trying to explain to people like, hey man, this is a lot of hard work. This is multiple years of surveys, and I spent hundreds of hours on this computer analyzing, and to just have someone, well, I see that the duck hunting is better during this time. And you're like, well, that's, by and large, not true. From what everybody else is saying, it's just that's your anecdotal evidence. And so when you have anecdotal evidences versus hard truths,
there's a perception bias there where they're like,
exactly.
I believe it's this way, and every time that I go out when I want to confirm my bias, I do get that confirmation, so therefore it is true.
I guess I'll ask another question of you guys, if you don't mind, going along with the different harvest limits. Are you guys familiar with splash limits, where we set up limits to where it's like, okay, you can only harvest 6 ducks in the central flyway. Of those 6 ducks, 5 can be mallards. Of those mallards, only 2 can be hens, 2 redheads, etc. And we kind of break it down like that. To whereas there's some states that are wanting to move forward to say, hey, we still have that, but you can shoot 3 ducks only, and it doesn't matter what kind there. You can shoot 3 hen mallards, but that's your limit for the day. You know what I mean? What are your thoughts?
Oh man. From a biological perspective, I'm not sure that's, I don't, that's a good question. I don't like that approach. I don't think I'd like that approach. What if you have a bunch of blue-winged teal and you want to, you have local populations that just need to be reduced, but you kill your 3, if everybody killed 3 hen mallards, you could artificially, lower populations of some species where others are growing and maybe could use more control. I don't know. Let me ask, I'm going to push it Is the concern that people are misidentifying? I mean, is there that kind of concern, or what's the rationale?
The concern is not that people are misidentifying, is that people are identifying birds on the wing is a barrier to entrance for new participants who don't have a mentor. If you're an avid upland hunter and you think to yourself, well, man, either it's not in season right now or it's not very good right now, let's go take a crack at duck hunting. I don't really know how to duck hunt all that well. I can't really identify this versus that, and the regulations are confusing. If I cross Highway 281, I'm in a different zone. Instead, if you say, well, I can go shoot whatever 3 ducks I want, it doesn't matter. Well, people think, well, then you're just copping out. If you don't know what kind of duck it is, don't pull the trigger. And it's like, well, how did you learn? There's mornings, the opening day of big duck season, I promise you, when it's still barely shooting light, I know my regulations and I know my bag limit takes, and I know that that's a legal duck right there because there's, it's a duck, and I haven't shot a mallard yet. And I think that it's going to help those people that maybe would self-select out of waterfowl hunting based on
You're making it easier.
Yeah.
So you don't have to worry as much. You're not making it. It's not like you have to identify the Japanese Zero from the P-51 Mustang before you let them land. You can just see them and you can go.
And you're also providing practice as well. So
can I ask a clarifier? Because I think maybe I missed a piece here. Did you say that you still have the regulations that allow for taking up to 6 or 8 or whatever it is of the collective, but then you also have this other? So it's sort of like you get to
default
pick which one you want to use. In that instance, I guess I don't have. Yeah, I missed that piece of it when you were describing it. I guess I don't have as many concerns about that. I thought you were, when I was originally hearing it, I thought you were saying switching entirely to just 3 of anything. And I guess I have in that instance, I think I'd have more concerns unless it was really biologically justifiable. But I would suspect that the hardcore duck hunters are still going to want to kill a lot more, more birds.
Yeah, they're going to go for the 6 bird limit, which is requires more identification.
Right, right.
I think
that's an interesting concept.
How many states are doing it?
I don't know that number off the top of my head. I heard that Nebraska was moving towards that this season, and then I had heard that Canada was going to a 6 bird splash limit. I don't know much about Canada hunting. I'll be the first one to tell you that because I've never been up there and I haven't planned a trip up there. But I have heard of this concept and its eventual application in a multitude of conversations and maybe a couple of articles online.
Yeah, I could see the advantages though, because I know there's been a couple times where I've tried to go duck hunting and try to get into the sport, and it is thoroughly confusing. And if you don't know what you're shooting, I mean, so it's just anytime you go and you attempt to do something, you're not going to pull the trigger until you've been out several times and you're confident in what you're doing. Or I guess you could be a guy that doesn't really care. But the way I do it, I am going to be hesitant on pulling the trigger unless I know I'm doing it right. I got the right species, the right area, the right everything. And it's a pretty complex system for waterfowl hunting.
Hey, Mike, want to go duck hunting together?
I think it would be good to go duck hunting. We should do that.
It's for a different reason. No. You'll hesitate. I'll be pulling the trigger.
No, that's fine.
It really brings up one of the challenges that game and fish agencies face right now, and it's a growing challenge. So first of all, there are less hunters than there used to be. There are, in many cases, better populations than there used to be. So you have to figure out how to manage that, but also the expectations from people are changing, and we need to figure out how to deliver products to those new people who are coming in. And it's not just waterfowl hunting. One of the things that I think is unique is you see a state like Colorado, how they have to manage, so Wyoming and Colorado hunting couldn't be, more different, elk hunts, except that you're both hunting elk because of the lengths of the seasons, the types of the seasons, the limitations on how often you can go out with what weapon, because you have an agency there that has to not only manage the numbers of elk, but they've got so many people that want to elk hunt that now they really have to be inventive in how they allocate those opportunities. And I think agencies are going to have to more and more think outside the box to make sure that they're doing their job of managing game species while also providing opportunities for hunters. And so it's going to be a continuing problem. It's going to get bigger.
Hey, Ben, have you seen any, you mentioned surveys, just sort of a passing comment. You'd mentioned surveys. I'm kind of wondering, have you seen with this change in some states, do you know if survey data is coming in, and if going to a change of 3 any duck, right, versus the 6, if that's having any noticeable impact on survey data?
I couldn't speak scientifically and competently in that fact. I'll tell you what the conversations that I have with though is whether or not harvest is an added thing or if it's a compensatory thing. And whether that means is the duck that I shot on opening morning, that duck was probably not going to make it to the next season or something of that nature, or is did I just take a duck out of the breeding population? And when you look at the harvest numbers, especially for mallards, right? The harvest restrictions, it limits you to 2 hens. And then there's some people that will shame you for shooting a limit of hens of, all species, and dead hens don't lay eggs, is their slogan. But there is, I think, some counter, research to maybe, hunter harvest being, not compensatory. I can't remember the correct word for it, but not making that big of a difference, in the long game. And so back to your original, point is that, and I think you were maybe alluding to that this year, the Fish and Wildlife Service wasn't able to do their population survey due to COVID restrictions. And one of the interesting opportunities that I know that a lot of people are really looking at is seeing, okay, how can we compare and test our indicator data to next year's gap and kind of analyzing that gap of data. And I've got a good friend that he does it every year. He's one of the lead guys. I won't call him out by name or state because I didn't ask for his permission. But we talk about it quite frequently. And it's an interesting topic right now for sure.
So I have a question for you.
Surveys are important.
Go ahead.
I wanted I wanted to hammer this point on surveys just a little bit because you said the Fish and Wildlife Service did not do their survey this year because of COVID. How important why do they do the surveys? How important are these surveys that they're doing? Because I know you're talking about now there's a gap year, have survey data one year and we won't have any this year. And how do we,
Well, I guess I look at it
filling that gap, but why do they do it? And what's, basically why do they do it? How valuable is that information and what is it used for?
Well, first and foremost, I believe it's and you'll be the one to correct me, or I believe it's a requirement from the Migratory Bird Treaty Act that in order to allow us to manage, or to have these liberal hunting days, that we must back it up with science and data and make sure that we're not letting population numbers go awry, go the way of things were in the 1800s. And I think it's probably extremely important there's no mistake about it right now. We are in the heyday of duck hunting, even though you listen to people from different parts of the country that might tell you different. Our waterfowl populations are pretty healthy right now, and because we've had great conditions in the primary breeding habitat and the wintering habitat, in the prairie pothole region, and then all along. And there's been a lot of good work that's been done by NGOs and state agencies, and
the Duck Stamp Act. You're buying your duck stamp every year, that money's going back into improving that habitat, and a lot of that habitat in the prairie pothole region. You say NGOs, but duck stamp money as well has been key for that critical breeding habitat. Yeah.
Maybe get me back on track. I have a comment about your guys' last episode that I wanted to talk to Nephi about. But
I can't wait.
I want to get to that in just a second. Prime that. I can't wait. Prime that. But really finishing up the discussion about the surveys and how they're used. So you were kind of going down that path of saying they're required by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act to do these surveys to understand, what biologically speaking, what the populations are for purposes of establishing what the seasons and the durations of seasons and the bag limits might be. Then we kind of tangented a little bit.
Without masquerading myself as an expert on this or working in it every day, it's interesting. Things like as long as I've hunted, it's been, 5 mallards, of which 2 can be hens. And that's driven by, and that's in the Central Flyway, and that's driven by, population surveys versus hunter harvest and health of, kind of a rounded out decision. But in that same time, I've seen flip flop of pintail limits. 1 year it's 2 years or 2 pintails, 1 year it's 1 pintail, and the next. And I think they're keeping a really good pulse on different indicator species ducks as well, to be able to make sure that we're managing those correctly and that we're not over harvesting, or it's not even over harvesting too. It's just that, let's say the habitat for pintails, for instance, wasn't as favorable 1 year, and they didn't have a very good turnout. A number of reasons and variables why they didn't have a good hatch, and then we just smack pintails all down the Central Flyway, and we don't put as many back on the breeding grounds, and then we've added to that.
So I have a quick question for you about, and then we can get to.
Then we can talk to. Then we can pull that pen out, and you can bring up the Nephi question.
So we talked about. You talked about kind of the managing different numbers of waterfowl. I want to know about hunters. What do you see as the trends in waterfowl hunting when you look at hunter numbers? So you said we live in the good old days of waterfowl hunting. Is the good old days increase? Is that getting more people waterfowl hunting, or are we seeing because this is a problem nationally where you're seeing actually decline in hunter numbers, and probably even though we don't all get the exact tag we want in Wyoming or wherever else, we do know that the animals and the opportunities are probably better than they've ever been, yet hunter numbers are going down. What's it like with waterfowl?
I feel like every time I talk to somebody who's been hunting for a while, at some point or another, they talk about some Duck Dynasty wannabe kids blowing on their calls in daddy's boat at the public ramp. And they're like, I don't even like this lake anymore. It's been ruined by all the Duck Dynasty hunters. And I think what we're seeing is a more concentration of people onto certain public lands to hunt waterfowl, because there's some excellent public land opportunities to hunt waterfowl in this country. And most of your private land is river access or ponds or agricultural fields, which those are generally people that fall in a different camp as the ones that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Some of the other go ahead. Sorry.
I was just saying, I totally get what you're saying. I think you see the same thing with big game hunting in the West. There's a lot of backlash sometimes against, these, younger hunters who are, the 20 to, let's call them 20 to 35 year old or 18 to 35 year old that are, packing trailheads that hunt, public lands. And this is, I'm sure, every place across the U.S. you have these young hunters that don't have the money to get a lease, that don't have the relationships. And then you have this older set of hunters who are, all the guys Dave hunts with, who are all old and about to die, who are like all this whole group who kind of resent the fact that new hunters are coming up and they're like, they don't want to mingle with them. And so you concentrate. I think you do. I think you concentrate these new hunters, these younger hunters that don't have the resources, you concentrate them on public lands, because everybody else is kind of, to be frank, this older generation, we're kind of squirreling away some of those areas, and it's somewhat problematic.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also, finding permission on private property. That's like a level 300 hunter course right there. That's not that's not Hunter 101. Hunter 101 is go find your nearest public ground and throw out a couple decoys and see what you can get,
That's
asking for permission and figuring out how to do all that and work up the nerves so that's Hunter, 300.
That's a fact. I've been very fortunate in that I just latched on to a pre-existing lease and I've been on it. I know how difficult it is to find access. And frankly, a lot of the great places that are private have been locked up for long periods of time. So knowing how to get in is hard. Knowing how to find that, if there's a hunting club, Nephi's flashing some Benjamins right now, trying to get in. That's how you get in. It's hard. It's hard. And you're right that the first place everybody starts is public, but even that can be tricky, finding out, where the public opportunities are and when you have to get out there to make sure you beat the crowds, and where to set up and how, all that kind of stuff. Right. How about this question you wanted to ask Nephi about our last episode?
Okay. You guys were talking about the duck stamp and saying, oh, I've never been to a post office, or like, why do they sell at the post office? And there was this disgruntlement from Nephi, and I didn't understand it at all. And I think it goes back to this. There are something like 5 million stamp collectors in the country. 5 million people that collect stamps in some sort of capacity. What do we sell? We sell was it 1.5 million duck stamps a year?
Yeah, roughly.
Yeah, 1.5 million duck stamps in a year, and there's something like 1.1 million waterfowl hunters each year.
They're just over.
We're going to record this in 2 sessions. Oh, hey, we're good. We're back. Check. Yep. Yeah, and I'll cut this out. But what happened is have you heard? Voice Meter? Have you seen that before?
Yeah.
So I used Voice Meter, and Voice Meter freaked out for a second, and you started coming through digital while you were answering that question. It sort of started sounding bad, so that's why I stopped it, shut Voice Meter down, fired it back up so I could check with Audacity. Now we're back to good.
Let's just we'll have a couple seconds of silence so you can see it in the mix.
Yep.
And let's start with let's start that part of that discussion over and just go right back to Ben's question about last week's episode. So I'll tee it up that way.
Okay, ready?
So I had a question about Nephi. You guys were talking about duck stamps on the last episode. And Nephi was berating the U.S. Postal Service.
I'm just scared every time I go to a post office.
And he didn't understand why maybe he should have to go to the post office to buy his duck stamp in this day and age. Well, I was thinking about that, and I always thought it was a good thing that it was there because a lot of people go to the post office, maybe not Nephi or maybe anybody, but there's a lot of
I go to the post office.
So do I. Well, there's something like 5 million stamp collectors in America, and I'm sure I can guarantee you the duck stamp is sitting in somebody's stamp collection.
I never considered it. I'm ready to eat crow.
Well, the other thing too, you got to remember.
Crow a migratory bird?
No.
Okay, just was checking.
I do not believe it's covered by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. No.
No, I mean that's 1,000% sure on that.
I'm 99.
He's not. But that I'm
like 23% sure. I'm like 7.5% sure. It might be covered. Anyway,
that's really cool. That's really cool thing you brought up. And in all seriousness, I joke about it just because it's like, really, you're going to make us go to the post office? But at the same time, that's awesome. And I'd never thought about that.
Think of the history. Think of the history too. Maybe a lot of millennials probably don't go to the post office, but maybe if they do have to go get their duck stamp there, it's a place, back history. In the day, that was a place of people hung out at the post office.
I go there because I have to get those boxes that you buy to ship, the one rate box so I can send stuff on eBay. It's not true. I don't do that, but I was
going to say, I haven't shipped anything in a long time.
You should go to the post office. It's wonderful.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, you were saying.
Yeah. Well, there's something like we were saying 1.5 million duck stamps sold every year. And there's 1.1 to 1 million waterfowl hunters that actively participate that buy a stamp and then actually hunt that year. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's close to 500,000 duck stamps that, we're selling without any consumption at all. So,
yeah. I'm gonna do this really brief rabbit hole, because I hate. I know we've talked about this before, but I hate the way that hunters are pegged as consumptive users and other users are not. And one thing about the duck stamp is that the duck stamp is your entry, as Mike noted last week, it's your entry pass into wildlife refuges. I mean, you buy a duck stamp, you get into wildlife refuges. And I've always argued that anybody that uses public lands in any way, whether for hiking or bird watching or anything, is a consumptive user because they're having some kind of impact of some degree on the environment around them. And it's manifesting in studies now, like in the Vail area, the mountain biking and fat tire biking is starting to cause displacement of elk and reduced reproductive rates in elk herds and declining elk herds, in that area because of what some people would call non-consumptive use. Now, those people that are buying the stamps,
well, that was awkward. Yet one more spot that we can cut because, there's nothing like a good, and I'm not.
How long do you think does he know right now?
He knows. He knows he's off. So in case he doesn't come back, we'll just pretend like he didn't. So yeah, there are places in Colorado. So break for 3 seconds. So yeah, there are places in Colorado now actually where you're having pressure from uses, these non-contributing uses that are affecting wildlife populations. They're affecting elk mortality. They're affecting the birth rates of wildlife, and that's just because of the general pressure. So it's an issue. How do we encourage other people to contribute? Is there an opportunity for other people to contribute, like people contribute with the duck stamp? I guess, how do we get them there for everything else? Yeah.
So I was going to pose this question, and maybe I'll wait till Dave gets back. But actually, I'd like to hear from you guys. Colorado, they just made it so that if you want to access public lands, right, you got to purchase a hunting license. And at first I'm thinking, oh, that is awesome. More money, for, conservation, and about time we make, those other, as Dave would say, consumptive users pay up and not just shoulder the burden on hunters. There's another side though, as I started turning the philosophical wheels on it, is what happens when we are not the majority shareholder of the funding of conservation for hunting. Now, by and large, if we have backpackers that are also paying for conservation, and backpackers now become the number one people that are paying for conservation, where does that leave hunters? And I kind of thought about that.
Real interesting issue that you brought that up, because we've talked a lot about the Great Outdoors Act, and we've talked about a lot about the Recovering America's Wildlife Act, and it's actually a unique issue within the hunting community. There are there are individuals in the hunting community, and not just the hunting community, who are saying like, hey, do we really want everybody else to have input? Because if they do, then what does it do to our leverage? If the guy who's a bird watcher says, I put as much money in as you do as a hunter, and then you're going to shoot my birds, what does that do? And the industry, and I say, Sportsmen right now are Sportsmen. The North American model is paid for by Sportsmen, by people involved, whether it's Sportsmen buying firearms and ammunition to participate in shooting sports and hunting, or it's those license dollars that match those things. That's where the money's coming from that's running these agencies. And so the question then becomes, well, if that's not the money that's running these agencies, if the money's coming from someplace else, if these agencies suddenly, if the Wyoming Game and Fish Department doesn't think hunters are quite so important, well, then what? Then what happens when we show up at a meeting and complain about bag limits and game seasons and the cause of tags? Then what? When we're only 3% of the population, then what? And it's a legitimate concern. And it's, what happens? That's one of the reasons. And I'll stop talking for a second so somebody else can say something. Then I'll tell you what I think.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask is it a legitimate concern? And I'll put it this way. I don't know if I agree with this. I'm just going to put out a statement. You're right that fish and game and fish agencies get the bulk of their funding in most states, not in all states, in most states, from hunters and anglers. There are exceptions. Missouri gets a ton of their funding from a sales tax that everybody pays. Colorado gets a ton of funding from lottery revenue that people buying lottery tickets pay. What I'd say is the money funds the agency, but the policies that the agency enact are set by the respective state commissions. And those state commissions are appointed typically by governors, and they become kind of political decisions. And so even if the wildlife, the agencies are funded by hunters and anglers, you could have politics such that leverage of saying that hunters pay for everything in the end doesn't matter, because you have a state where the demographics pivot, and you have the demographics pivot, the politics pivot, and the makeup of the commission then changes. And the makeup of the commission that used to be made up of primarily hunters and anglers and maybe landowners now has other users or even non-users. You might have PhD biologists from universities that have never hunted. You might have people from NGOs that have never hunted that maybe aren't favorable to hunting. And you're actually seeing that happen in places around the country. I think the bigger issue isn't necessarily everybody paying. The bigger issue is how we educate the non-hunting public about the importance of hunting for conservation. And that's where our influence is. It's not necessarily at the agency level.
Well, I want to back up a little bit, and because there's a lot to unpack in what you just said, but I will, because you said you weren't sure how much of that. I'm going to disagree with some of it, because I think that there are states where we're already seeing it. There are states where we're clearly seeing a reduction in hunter numbers and a reduction in participation in hunting in those states has clearly changed the focus of the agency, and the agency acts differently. And the people who work for the agency act differently because they're customer service representatives.
But why has it gone down? Has the decline in hunter participation and angler participation, has that been because there's been a bigger societal shift within the state, that it's become more urbanized? I
don't think it matters.
People are more disconnected
down.
But I think it might. I think it might.
From a fun, I don't think it does. But and yes, it does. But the issue here is that when the change occurs, again, what you're seeing is hunters with less influence on the decision making that's going on in the agency, and we can talk about how to address that. But there's no doubt about it occurring, and even in those same states where that has occurred, and hunters have those states, because of the budgetary implications of not being able to do conservation anymore because they don't have the hunter dollars, suddenly you have people in that state going, whoops, wait a minute, we don't have money anymore. Maybe we should care about hunters. Maybe we should care about what they want. In fact, we should do hunter recruitment. And they're doing it because of the budgetary implications. Now, if you didn't have that budgetary implication, if they didn't care, if they were going to get their money anyway, do you think that they would still be writing articles to big papers in their state and trying to figure out how to make things work? Or would they just say, we don't need
Missouri does.
Yeah.
Missouri has more money than they know what to do with when it comes to
talking about though. And
I'm just saying to your point,
the problem's going to grow unless we fix it. And that's why, to fix it, how do you fix it?
Can we bring it back down to, so let's say we get into a future where we don't rely on hunters we don't depend on hunters for conservation funding. What happens to my own personal justification for why I go hunting, other than just the fact that I'm continuing heritage and I enjoy it, which would be my, those are arguments that I have, but I also come at hunting from a utilitarian standpoint where that my ends justify my means. I'm consuming that meat for me and my family, and that's why I kill these ducks and this deer and etc. Also, the money that I spend on the pursuit of that game is the only thing that's standing in the way of them being eradicated right now. And so, you talk about all the state level policy stuff too, but then what happens, on the personal level as well when we're no longer
But you're still contributing. You just might not be the primary contributor.
You'll lose opportunity.
I just think
we have opportunity if they don't grow their ranks. If hunters aren't interested in, if we just accept this and everybody just nods their head and goes, okay, we'll go quietly into the night, you're done. We'll all be done. Because
so I'm not advocating for that.
No,
I'm not advocating
and that's what I'm saying. I mean, that's why we need to be very careful with this because, if there's and again, I think it's why it's important to look at some of the coalitions that are built supporting things like the Great Outdoors Act, because if the members of that coalition really don't care about each other, if the the wildlife groups of the world aren't really on board with the sportsmen's groups of the world, and they're going to sell each other out at the end of the day, it's not going to work out. And that's why there has to be a level of integrity, faith, and trust in each other to work together long term to make sure that, if you were a member of one of those non-hunting wildlife groups, you better care about the future of hunters and vice versa. And there has to be that relationship there, or we're done with hunting.
But there will be a point in time, if the numbers continue, in which you're going to have to bring somebody else into the tent. I mean, you're presuming that it's a pie, and you can only slice up so many pieces to pass around, rather than having multiple people involved. And if you wait too long, it's going to be forced upon you. You're going to need money for conservation to have that wildlife, that habitat available for you even to want to hunt on. And so you're going to have to bring them in at some point. And I think with anything, you better be thinking ahead about how you can bring them in a positive way where they recognize the value of hunters, as opposed to we fail because we get too small and they come in and they come in and say, well, I guess we're in charge now. So go have a seat. We got it from here.
I agree with you, but that's why also that education has to be there. There has to be dialogue and discussion about, who was here and what we've been doing. Or
education
we're
is
problems.
Paramount. Education's paramount.
Yeah.
That's absolutely key. But I think Mike's right too.
It's already trending
over the
that
long
way.
term.
It's even trending that way within our community. I mean, we've talked about it before. Who pays Pittman Robertson, right? Who's funding? And there's this assumption like, oh yeah, hunters, and we pay Pittman Robertson. Nah, sort of we do, but there's we pay 20% of it. Now, yeah, we're buying all the tags, but there are a lot of little old ladies who live in downtown Dallas who, they're never hunting, but they're paying a whole lot of money into conservation. So it's already happening. And we're already failing at education, right? Like how many hunters realize that, number one, and then how many of those sport shooters realize that? Like we can really do a better job.
Go farther. Land and Water Conservation Fund. Yeah. Where does that money come from, right? How's all that conservation money? It's coming from oil and gas, right? I mean, so those companies are paying for conservation. It's so, and it happened. There are other programs too out there. Where does the money come from? A lot of it actually comes from the general taxpayer as well. Land management decisions for BLM, Forest Service. Where's that money coming from? It's coming from the Treasury, right?
But everything you're giving as an example is so diffuse that it's not personal to those groups, to the general public. Whereas with hunters, it's personal because you're buying your tag, you're doing your specific thing to say, I'm now entitled to go do something. And if you're going to impose upon the backpackers or the non-contributory users a specific fee or a use fee for those outdoor areas, it's going to be personal and they're going to want a voice.
Yeah,
I mean, I get that, but if you're not going to create a different solution for funding conservation and habitat, and the only real option is a use fee type system, because that's all we can stomach for raising taxes, you're not going to have a choice. They're going to be here. They're going to be talking. And so I don't know, it seems worth planning ahead and seeing what we can do to provide outreach and talk to them and figure out how can we get in this together. And I still get to hunt. You still get to come and see Pretty Woods or whatever it is, right? For whatever the group is. It's not going to work every time. And there's certainly those groups that are opposed to hunting and have been for a long time, but they're going to exist. But there's got to be ways that you can find that radical middle where there is agreement. There is sort of cross-pollination of ideas. It just has to be done, but we're not, I don't know. It doesn't seem like we're doing a rock solid job of figuring that out yet.
And we're not going to solve it tonight either. So I'm going to pivot to something else real quick, or we're going to go down this rabbit hole and never come out of it. I know, Ben, you've had some ideas on what COVID means for waterfowl hunting in the United States this year, like what effects that might have. And I mean, like Canada, you've talked to me. I know you've talked to me about hunting in Canada, waterfowl hunting in Canada. That U.S. citizens are one of the biggest contributors to that, or participants in that, and they might not. U.S. citizens might not be able to go to Canada to hunt waterfowl this year. What does that, in your mind? What does that mean? Or, what are the implications of that? The opportunities from that?
Well, yeah. There's a lot of Americans that go up to Canada every fall, and there's a lot of American guides that go up to Canada to guide up there. And so there's an economic piece to that, right? For Canada, as well as for those American guides that are making the expedition up there to do such thing. And that's one interesting point of it. the second interesting point of it is at least that what everybody's talking about right now is well, geez, if there's not going to be a bunch of birds shot up in Canada this year, man, Louisiana might finally get some mallards again, is what they're, is what everybody's talking about. And I just think it'll be really interesting, especially since COVID hit right around turkey season, right? And so we got to see how some states reacted to COVID and out of state hunting, and then hunting for residents as well. Some states adopted the outdoors is good for you. Some people said, nope, like you can't go fishing, you can't go hunting. And some people gave away free hunting or free fishing licenses. And the restriction, the thing is, for instance, on the books right now, I've got like 4 states I'm waterfowl hunting in, on my Google Calendar right now. And if we start going, because waterfowl is a regional sport, especially if you're getting really into it, and if we start closing down borders or not allowing out of state license, purchases, that's going to, especially people that live on borders, is going to severely limit their waterfowl hunting plans this year. And at a time when we are losing hunters, we can't really afford to, I don't want to say can't really afford to, but I just don't really know how that's going to affect recruitment and retention.
Yeah, it's going to be a huge issue.
Oh, go ahead, Nephi. Sorry.
We're gonna run into a very unique problem this year, and I think I might have talked about it last time. But we're gonna run into record potential Pittman Robertson dollars coming into agencies this year, and nobody and challenges for hunters and challenges for the numbers of hunters that are there to help contribute to those agencies. And as you said, the outfitters. We know in Wyoming, I can't tell you how many people I know that like have just had trips canceled, and where people aren't coming anymore. It's a huge impact.
Now, the flip side of that coin, so there's a huge impact on interstate travel, and interstate hunting part, and non-resident license. Just a second, which is there's also a counterbalance to that. Not really a balance from a financial standpoint, but there are actually a lot more resident licenses being sold in a lot of states. There are a lot more people that haven't hunted that now, because they had to cancel their big vacation someplace, are saying, well, I guess I can afford I have to vacation and recreate locally. And one of the things I'm going to do is hunt. And there are actually new hunters coming online locally. It's a great recruitment opportunity at the local level.
Great recruitment.
COVID has created a great when we're talking R3, a great recruitment opportunity, even though you're going to see a decrease in the money and the interstate commerce. The local opportunity and the ability to sign up new hunters is there. That opportunity is there.
You've got a chance for people to buy more tags. The problem is they're all local. And so
but that's the problem, but it's a benefit too, because you're getting new hunters that then next year can become interstate hunters.
Potentially, yeah. But there's the challenge for those agencies. That's not going to fill the coffers. So what's going to happen is those record PR dollars, they're not going to stick. Some of these agencies, and I will tell you, I talked to directors, and they have told me, as we worked really hard in the outfit that I worked for to make sure that we could get money to those directors to work on programs, to build ranges, to do those types of things. And I was told by them, after we were very excited about like how much PR dollars they're going to get, they said like, well, that's not our problem getting the PR dollars. Our problem is the match.
We got to have the match.
We have all this money come in, this slug of money from, this year, 3 million people became new gun owners since March. That's not bought a new gun. That's 3 million people bought a gun for the first time since March. It's currently the middle of July. So that's not counting January, February, and March. This is the end of March till now. And so you're right. It creates a huge opportunity. We've got all these new people. And now those people, if we play this right, we can get a bunch of those people into hunting.
Yeah. So there's a
we better do it. We better do it.
Yeah. So there's there's a saying that the businesses that, like when you're in a recession or you're in tough times, the businesses that make the right decisions during that recession tend to come out stronger and leading on the back end. They're stronger for it. And so the same thing applies here. Like those agencies that do the work, the people that do the work to recruit and to get new hunters now, yeah, they're going to see lower revenues in the short term, but over the long term, if they play it right now, they're going to be stronger for it.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's just an opportunity there.
Yeah. We know that most of those people that became new firearms owners, they did so for security reasons. And here's one of the things that we can give them is food security, an opportunity to be able to get out and to, and all the spare time, spend time with your family, to, get out into the great doors, to naturally social distance and to become more self-sufficient. They're all ready for that. But as hunters, and this is kind of interesting because this is really kind of the outfit. This is what you do professionally is we got to open the doors. We got to open the doors. We got to invite these people in. We got to make them part of the family. We have to share the spots. We have to not be mad that they're at our boat launch.
Yeah, no, I'm still going to be mad.
We can't. We can't.
I can't help it. It's visceral.
Because
Ben, are you telling me that you wouldn't get upset to see 20 people at your boat launch?
That's why I take new people every year.
I'll see 20 people, but they'll be like, yeah. I'll see their headlights coming in as I'm already rowing out. But I very rarely will I shoo somebody away. In fact, I talked about probably the worst thing I've ever done on public land on our last episode of the Fowl Front. But since then, I've always been.
What was it?
I hung a headlamp where this group had been. They'd been setting up way, 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 way too close to me and really cutting our shots off. And I knew they were coming back the same morning, so I hung a headlamp about 150 yards from where we were. Or no, it was less than that. I can't remember, but to make it appear as such that somebody was there, and they bumped down a little bit. So
that's what worked.
Yeah, but I felt pretty bad about it because, and I ended up having a pretty bad shoot because it turns out that them being there kind of did benefit me.
Yeah, but it sounded like a necessity for safety.
Yeah, that's why the headlamp's there.
Sure.
Don't feel bad.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, safety.
Yeah. Yep. Yes, thank you, Mike.
I actually think that sounds like a pretty good tactic or tip.
I think it might. It's probably some sort of misdemeanor or something, like probably like littering and hunter harassment or intimidating. Who knows?
Yep. There's no. Find him.
Yeah. Yes. But I let it be known to the judge, and this will be entered in evidence that I do feel bad about it.
Yeah.
Oh, that always helps.
Doesn't matter.
Remorse helps in the sentencing phase. You're still
exactly.
guilty as heck, but the remorse helps in the sentencing phase.
Maybe it'll be time served.
So I've got a couple last questions for you. We've run a little long and want to let you get back to work because I'm sure Dinger's got a bunch more stuff to do. Have you do before you are allowed to go to bed and get that hour of sleep. Because it just seems like the type of guy he probably is. You have to log in your sleep hours and
tell him to send me some sweatshirts, Dinger.
Anyway, well, I actually have a bunch of stuff I'd love to continue to cover. So we may have to continue some of this another time, but I have two questions for you. One is as somebody that got into waterfowl hunting as an adult and you had to really, pardon the pun, you had to learn on the fly. You're developing the skill set without real mentorship. You're having to do DIY to the extreme, right? If somebody wants to get into waterfowl hunting, hasn't done it before, doesn't have a mentor, what's the best advice you can give them? What should they do?
The first thing and foremost, game wardens are not the enemy. They are your friend, and they are happy to answer any questions that you have after reading the regulations and to get interpretations on them and help you out. Two is look at the areas where you would be most, because I think the thing that most people are, they're not nervous about whether or not they can go out and harvest a duck or what they can shoot it. They're worried about breaking laws, and they're worried about breaking social laws as well. No one wants to be the guy that's like, oh, I didn't realize this was an optifade marsh kind of hunting situation and not a timber fade marsh or whatever. Like that is a perceived notion for some people. And so setting up structures such as I think the biggest thing is waterfowl identification and looking at the most restrictive bag limit. And so if you can't identify a teal between a regular big duck, then just skip teal season, or you need to go find somebody or really study until you really feel confident about it. But if you're in big duck season and you know that, hey, I can't identify the difference between a pintail and a mallard right now, or a hen mallard between a drake, looking at your most restrictive species, and then that's the only amount of birds that you can take in one volley. So if you know that you can only shoot one pintail, you can only shoot one duck until you have that thing in your hand. You pull out your book and you're like, that's a pintail. And now since I can't identify it on the wing, I'm done. Or that's a widgeon. I'm good to go. I got, I can continue hunting. That's a good thing. And then don't have to break the bank in any of your gear. Those are my things.
No, that's all great stuff. I have to ask you one more on this too, because you mentioned, we talked about it before, access can be a limitation to entry. So, and I know you do a lot of public land duck hunting, and I don't know how willing you are to give up I'm not going to ask you to give up locations, but tactics to that person that's looking to get out there for the first time and get into it. What would you recommend? How would you recommend, what should they look for in public land opportunities or even private land opportunities? How should they address that access barrier?
Yeah, probably the number one hurdle there, and as far as access goes, is finding the correct water to hunt on. I don't think a new hunter is going to be going out by themselves on a field hunt, and so that might be, or maybe it's a river or a creek or it's a little pond. I think little ponds are like the perfect place to introduce somebody to waterfowl hunting. But by and large, I would say probably your most popular one would be your walk-in marshes. A new guy or gal is probably not going to have a boat. Maybe they can get a hold of a kayak, which I highly recommend if you've got the dollars for it. It doesn't have to be an expensive one, but it'll be those areas where you can walk through the woods, find some reeds, and then water. That's probably what you're looking at as far as a new hunter.
Where do they go to find those resources? The resources of where public land opportunities are.
Sure. Every state's
got walk-in opportunities.
Yeah. Every state's got an atlas of public lands. That's a great place to start, because if you're going to Walmart, you're not purchasing your stuff online. It's right there, next to the credit card machine. Or if you're online, it's probably one click away, the public hunting access map. You can go to apps too, like selfless or shameless plug here. Powderhook's got an awesome little public lands map on it. That I like because it's very, very visually appealing, because you can turn it on and it's like got the yellow backspace and then you see the little black lines. And then there's other apps, such as Onyx, where you can find these different opportunities, but look for water. And you'll probably be able to find ducks.
All right. Last question. At the end of all of our podcasts, we ask our guests, this is the Your Mountain podcast. We ask our guests, and you know this because I actually asked you this question on your podcast when I was on your podcast. But I want to know, what is your mountain? What is that place or that, physical, metaphorical, spiritual, whatever place that is so important to you, and maybe it's the reason why you hunt. Maybe it's the reason you keep hunting. Maybe it's something else, but what's your mountain?
If I were to give you the same answer as I did on my podcast, it's about 300 acres in Kansas that was about 5 minutes from my home, that provided me with hunting access through permission of a very nice gentleman during a time when it was kind of hard for me to get out because we had a newborn. I was working 16, 17-hour days, and it was literally 5 minutes from my house, and it was an awesome opportunity. And it provided me a lot of stress relief in a situation where I was experiencing a lot of stress with a newborn and some of the turbulence that comes with that, and maybe not a particularly easy birth process for my wife. And that isn't the reason I started hunting. It's not the reason I continued hunting, but it did provide me, as hunting most always does, with one of the most important things in my life, and that's getting centered and getting away from technology for a little bit and getting away from my family just enough so that they miss me, and being able to connect and get back to some of that, primal inner stuff and connecting with friends out in nature. So that's kind of what does it for me. That's my mountain.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I always appreciate hearing what everybody's mountains are. Right? It's one of my favorite parts of doing this podcast is when our guests tell us what their mountains are, because there's not one person that's told us their mountain that you couldn't feel the emotion in it. And that's a really cool thing. Just a really cool thing. Guys, do you have any other questions for Ben?
No, I think it's been good. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, I appreciate your guys' as well.
Do you have a goose pit?
I'm a run and gun kind of guy.
No, I was just checking. That's it, Dave. That's all I got.
Did I do good on that one, Dave, by not revealing if I had a goose pit?
It's up to you if you want to reveal if you have one or not.
I'm working on it, Nephi. I'm working on it. It'll be along the Platte River, and when I do, I'll call you up.
That's what a good man would say. That's a good man right there.
Yeah. Well, so this conversation went all over the place, and I know sometimes Mike, Nephi, and I kind of sucked the air out of your voice on a couple of occasions. I apologize for that, but I had a really good time. I really enjoyed this conversation. What I would say to everybody that feels like they didn't get enough of Ben is to go over to iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe to the Fowl Front Waterfowl Podcast. Subscribe to it. Start listening to the episodes there. There's a lot of great content for those of you that are new to waterfowl hunting, have done it for a while, took some time off and are getting back into it, or just love to hear discussions about, guys getting after it in the outdoors hunting. It's a great podcast. Subscribe to it. You'll get all the Ben Paige you want.
Probably more than you want.
Maybe more than you want. Probably
sure
not.
More.
Probably not though. And hopefully we can have you back on here and we can hear some of your stories and experiences as you've gone through, learning to be a hunter, and, where you are today and kind of that process you took and how just some of the cool stories and experiences you've had along the way. I think that'd be a fun follow-up podcast at some point in the future.
Yeah. Come hunt in Wyoming sometime. You don't need waiters. Come hang out with us.
I hate to say this, but, Nephi, I've actually invited Ben to come out and do a goose hunt.
Well, Dave, I guess we know what you're not getting for Christmas. I don't know, but whatever it was going to be, it's not that anymore.
You know what's funny though is that I've invited you this year. We're going to get you out there this year, Nephi.
I know.
I'm not, and maybe we'll all get out together. Maybe Ben will come out. We'll get Nephi. We'll get Mike. We'll go up and we'll have
we got to have a little bit of theater. A little bit of theater on the Your Mountain podcast.
Yeah, I get that.
Or else it'd be really dry.
We're going to do it.
We're going
to do it.
If people knew how boring we really were when we're just like, when it's the three of us, like really just sitting, like it's pretty dull.
Yeah.
It's pretty dull.
Your guys' podcast is one of my favorite podcasts to listen to. Almost every week, every episode I listen to it because I enjoy the policy portion because I don't know. I feel like it's my duty, and it's all of our duties to get, more boned up on this stuff and understand it on a little deeper level. And even though you guys do get a little wonky, as you call it, sometimes you do a really good job of relating the material to people who aren't living and breathing it every single day.
So that means you're welcome back on another episode.
Yeah, that's just sealed the invitation. I was going to ask you, Ben, if you had anything else that you'd like to add, but I think you're
done.
Yeah, we just
done.
That's the high note. No, in all seriousness, do you have any final words? Anything you'd like to add?
No, if you have never duck hunted before, ask a duck hunter. And if you're a duck hunter listening to, you better step up this season like we talked and take some people out.
Awesome. Well, again, Ben, thanks for joining us. Thanks for spending so much time with us. Everybody get out there, take a listen to the Fowl Front Waterfowl Podcast with Ben Paige as the host. And I believe he has 2-3 co-hosts now.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of crazy stuff
just
going
like
on.
All kinds of you're
hostile takeovers and
yeah. Anyway, go listen. And in the meantime, everybody remember that life is about experiences. So go have one.